And I'm very happy that the panelists are here. Also, Andreas Haarstrick, who arrived this morning, I guess. Yeah, okay. A big welcome to you. Thank you very much that you have agreed to sit here on the stage and to answer some questions. Important questions, of course. I would like to introduce you very briefly because of time constraints. We have to, not to hurry through the session, but we should keep the timeline in account. I would like to start in alphabetical order, just to begin with Christian. Christian is full professor at the Department of Geography, Water and Global Change Observatory, University of Costa Rica. Christian's research broadly focuses on catchment hydrology and the measurement and modeling of stream flow generation and biochemical processes. His basic aim is to better understand catchment functioning and the great variability of hydrological behaviors across different temporal and spatial scales. Special interest in his research play isotope traces and their incorporation into modeling. Insights from this research can be applied to assess the impacts of stream regulation and environmental change and the quality and quantity of surface and groundwaters in a context of global change, food and energy, and water security issues. I would also like to introduce Andrés Martínez Moscoso. He is associate professor at the University of San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. He works as a lawyer and has a PhD in politics and constitutional studies at the University of Alicante in Spain. He is full-time professor and director of the Institute of Legal Research of the College of Jurisprudence, University of San Francisco de Quito. He has dozens of publications in indexed magazines and has been a national and international consultant on issues related to water management and environmental law. He is a member of the World Commission on Environmental Law, CMDA, of the International Union of Conservation of Nature. His main lines of interest are water law, environmental law, and public management. Lars Ribbe, also a big welcome. We have already seen us, I guess. Yeah. Lars Ribbe is professor for integrated land and water resource management and director of the Institute of Technology and Resource Management in the Tropics and Subtropics at TH Cologne. He holds a PhD in the field of hydroinformatics. His current work is in research and teaching is river basin assessment, modeling and management, and he is specifically interested in developing knowledge systems helping decision makers to cope with prevailing water resources related challenges. At ITT, that is TH Cologne, he is the coordinator of the Master Integrated Water Resource Management student which is actively linked to similar master programs around the globe. I would like also to introduce Victor Schinde. Dr. Schinde is the head of the Climate Center for Cities at the National Institute of Urban Affairs in Delhi. He is a water management expert and he has worked as a scientist and technical expert in 9 countries in Asia and Africa: Bhutan, India, Japan, Mauritius, Philippines, Seychelles, South Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. Over the last 17 years, 17, not 70, he has worked in diverse domains of urban water management, includes flood risk assessment, urban river management, and integrated water resources management, water security assessment, and climate change adaptation in water sector. Last but not least, a special welcome to Diana Ulloa. I hope I pronounce it well. Okay. She is a consultant in water management and services. She has a distinguished Fulbright scholar. She refined her expertise through the Hubert Humphrey Fellowship and the prestigious Cornell University. In Ecuador, her roles as the technical undersecretary of Water National Plant Manager and advisor for Water Secretary left an indelible mark at the national level. Her contributions encompass the formulation of the Water Quality National Strategy, the innovative green chapter within the Water National Plan, and a pivotal national policy safeguarding water sources for both human consumption and irrigation. Notably, she spearheaded the establishment of the inaugural water protected area. She is co-funded and lead the Water Ecuador Network Ecuador, Red Agua Ecuador, an initiative that catalyzes collaboration and innovation within the sector. Additionally, she's a proud co-founder of Adaptation Latin America in a regional non-profit area. Thank you very much for being here. And please allow me, before we go to the question round, some points I would like to address that are in line with the headline of our today's panel, Tackling the Global Climate and Water Crisis. 30 years after Rio Summit, the global water situation has improved in some areas. However, in many other areas, the critical water situation has massively intensified due to the needs and impacts caused by rapidly growing populations and ongoing industrialization. Yes, also by reckless exploitation of nature as well as advanced climate change. The message emerging today from many scientific reports from water experts around the world is a serious one, underlining the absolute urgency for the world to adapt and prepare for a water crisis that is highly likely to occur. The reckless exploitation of nature and ongoing climate change are reinforcing factors here, triggering irreversible processes and destroying sensitive natural balances, of which biodiversity is the basis. The much discussed tipping point, which will with high probability be reached maybe in 2050, but nobody knows exactly when it will happen. But it will happen if mankind continues to act in a way as business as usual. So this was my kind of impulse, and I would like to start with Victor with a question that is a bit provocative. Yeah? And so there's a staggering indifference in the response of some world leaders to the disasters and emerging environmental and societal crises caused by climate change, such as the water crisis. None of the past world conferences in climate change have been led to real breakthroughs. Have we already failed in managing the crisis and have already reached the point of no return? Did we fail already?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Andreas, for that. It's a great question to start the panel with, yeah. So yeah, have we already reached a point of no return? I'd like to think no, well, not yet. Okay, and I'm speaking from my experience working with decision makers and very senior officials in the government in almost 9 different countries, right? So while I have a background in science and I am a scientist, but the last few years I have been working with the governments, and I think when we talk about decision making, especially averting the crisis, one thing that is very evident is that while science is important to inform decisions, that is not the only basis on which decisions are taken. And I think, Walter, I think in the first panel, he very correctly and, kind of hit the nail on the head when he said that decision making is a messy process. There are multiple layers that are involved in the decision making, right? But coming to the crisis, I can fully understand where you're coming from, because there have been a lot of conferences and there have been a lot of meetings, and it's sometimes very easy to be disillusioned that nothing is happening, right? But I think here, while water security, while climate change is a global challenge, the solutions to it are very local. Right, individual countries need to take the onus and need to take the initiative to get things cracking. Right. Now we all know the historic the Paris Agreement, COP15, right? So where it was for the first time, there was palpable actions that were propagated, for countries to take actions on climate change, and the very next year, okay, Germany, and I think that was in Morocco. So Germany came up, with the Climate Action Plan 2050. Okay, so very, very, very proactively coming up with that. And I'm not saying this because you're German. Okay, they did genuinely come up with a plan there. But see, I think at the end of the day, it is how decision makers approach, the crisis, right? And in my experience, working in these 9 countries, I've come across 3 categories of decision makers. The first are the ones who want to make a change, okay, but don't know how to do that. Okay, and that to me is a capacity problem, right? And that can be solved, right? Okay, it is. I think it is also pointed out in one of the panels before, or I think one of the keynote speakers mentioned that, right? It's evidence-based decision making, and the scientists give them the information that is required, to arrive at those decisions. So those kind of decision makers are easy to work with. The second category, and this is a smaller category now, are the ones who don't want to make a change, right? So, and these could be various purposes. They could have ulterior motives, different agendas, so on and so forth. But with a crisis as severe as water and climate change, I think there are very few of these decision makers out there, right? I think pretty much everybody wants to kind of make the change, right? And the third category, and I find this the largest category of decision makers, are the people who want to make a change but cannot make a change because they're constrained by so many things. They're constrained by finances, and they're constrained by contentious trade-offs, right? They're constrained by the balance of powers, so on and so forth. So I think in so many ways, the challenge is to understand these nuances, to understand, where we, what are those trigger points, what are those pain points, in the whole decision-making process, and then work around them, right? So it's a slow process, I admit, and like I said, I think you correctly pointed out, we haven't had the fair share of success as yet, but eventually, I think we would get there, right? So just to conclude, this thought, I just wanted to mention that climate actions, they actually require transformative solutions. Okay, the way a lot of these climate water actions, it's not end of pipe solutions, not band-aid solutions. A lot of them are transformative, and very often a crisis is actually a trigger for transformation. Like if you see the example of how Australia turned things around in the water sector, and that was because of the Great Millennium Drought that they had, right? Singapore is doing really well in water management because they wanted to reduce the reliance on Malaysia for fresh water. 3 years ago, I was I worked with the Los Angeles Water for Department and Power, and was surprised that they were investing so much in stormwater harvesting, despite having only 350 millimeters of rainfall per year, right? So it's crisis that sometimes defines, the way we approach, and I think we have no dearth of crisis today, right? In each of our countries. So when a crisis happens, I think there are 2 things that could happen. One is either we break or we evolve. And I think as humankind, we have that tenacity to evolve, and I think we should be able to surmount this. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Victor, for your positive attitude. That gives us hope, and I hope we will walk in that way, not to follow any more business as usual, but that we come to a real change. And you are right. I think the willing is there to make a change, but the question is how to do that and how long will it last. Thank you very much for that. My suggestion would be we go through the questions, and after you collect the questions out of the audience, I would say. Yeah. Okay. Christian, you are currently working on projects that will lead to a better understanding of the function of watersheds and large variability of hydrological behavior of different temporal and spatial scales. Based on this, you will seek to gain better insight into the impact of river regulation and environmental change on the quality and quantity of surface and groundwater, as I already mentioned, in the context of global change, energy, water security issues, and so on. Have you identified practical means through your research and engagement with officials and policymakers to assist policymakers in transforming successful public water policies into lasting medium and long-term resolution?
Thanks, Andreas. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I would just like to add something to the comment by Victor, if that's possible. So I will, constrain myself to not talk too much. The COP28 is coming up in about a month. World leaders will be meeting in Dubai and will take stock on what's been happening since Paris 2015. And I think the first reports are popping up that it's not all negative. Of course, the window is closing fast to take action on the 1.5 degrees limit, but there will be some positive news as well on renewable energies and climate-sensitive investments. So this is just something I really wanted to add because I haven't heard anything about the COP28 so far at this conference. So there it is. Yes, so I'm a university professor, and I work in Central America, Costa Rica particularly. So my point of view, my perspective is very much science and education based. And this is something I really wanted to highlight. There are opportunities, there are not solutions, but there were some ways forward we identified towards taking action on longer lasting, from midterm to longer term policies and solutions. So I really wanted to give some examples from that perspective, because I want to highlight that our greatest asset and the greatest potential is actually in education. So I'm based at the Department of Geography, which is very broad, as most of you know, but students get a pretty decent skill set in technical topics and also more soft skill, social skills. So there were examples where students actually got involved in politics directly. So this is not immediately at the highest level, but as soon as students are immersed in the politics, in the decision-making process, there is potential for change. And then if we're not talking about undergraduate studies, moving towards postgraduate studies, for example, we have an IWRM master at the University of Costa Rica, modeled after the other programs around the world that are coordinated by my colleague Lars Ribbe here at the TH Cologne. So it's very interesting because in Central America, students we get are not coming directly from undergrad studies, they're actually professionals. So they choose this career trying to get a foot into the water sector to take decisions, basically. So we had thesis projects that started out with a very technical aspect. I just wanted to give one example. In Costa Rica, there is no environmental flow regulation whatsoever. So one student came up with the idea, let's see what we can do, which types of measurements, monitoring we need, different types, hydrological characteristics, biological characteristics, to try to formulate some type of regulation that could help establish environmental flow in Costa Rica. This turned into a bigger project, at least multidisciplinary project. So we had biologists on board, we had the hydrologists, we had social scientists on board. And it's now being discussed to really be established for regulation in the country. So it took 3 to 4 years, but from a student project, postgrad project, it really turned into something useful that helps to formulate policy and regulation. And there are a couple of similar examples. And then what we definitely have to do, and it was emphasized before many times, so I don't want to talk about a transdisciplinary project because I haven't seen one in practice that really works, but at least multidisciplinary project where you get different disciplines on board, trying to work together and then help establish, formulate action towards those policies. So what we mostly do in those projects is focusing very much on communication and how to disseminate, trying to get the message across. So the model doesn't really help. This is too complex. It boils down to what decision makers need is something. Is it getting drier? Is it getting hotter? Very simple messages. So again, coming back to geography, producing maps is one of those tools that really help to communicate and trying to get the message across to or towards those longer-lasting policies. Then there are other educational efforts we try to do. So we run capacity workshops targeted at policy makers, different levels. So this is something that was useful because then most of these people that work in governmental institutions, they use tools, not too complicated, but that can be a data analysis tool, that can be a model tool, and really implement this in their daily business, taking decisions. And then it's also been mentioned before, but maybe criticized in Jamie's talk. So if at the governmental level we didn't see much change or a slow progress over time, so what really helped in a very Costa Rican context, I agree, not working with the most vulnerable communities, but really grassroots-based participatory projects help to democratize data, help the decision-taking process by communities at the local level, and that then kind of spiraled up from one community to the other, where people are directly involved in the monitoring, they're directly involved in the data sharing, in the data analysis to really identify problems and take decisions. And this was something that is effective, even on shorter time scales. And so much of the projects also now involve directly communities from bottom up to go up to the top. So this is something I wanted to emphasize. Education can play a big part in
Thank you very
policy
much.
making.
Thank you very much, Christian. And maybe I guess you have obviously had some positive moments with policymakers and politicians, I hope.
Yes, there were
Okay,
moments.
thank you.
It's not all easy, but yes, absolutely.
Okay. So when we speak about politicians, we can also speak about legal rights and some points here that we still not have, as far as I remember well, haven't addressed these days. To look at legal aspects concerning environmental law and. That's why I'm very happy to have Andres here, Martinez Moscoso. He is a lawyer, and as a result of climate change, I would like to introduce virtually all nations on this planet are affected and are already feeling the consequences of water shortage. Droughts and events such as floods, hurricanes, and fire disasters. Some of these events are quite localized, but the aftermath transcends local borders and even crosses national boundaries. Transboundary problems, that might be a big issue. As a lawyer and member of the World Commission on Environmental Law, CMDA, of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, do you think it is time for an international council with sanctioned rights and based on international established legislation to bring order and commitment to prevention, strategies, standards, and adaptive measures?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in my university, in my city. It's not so common. I'm a lawyer, but I am a different lawyer, so don't worry. I put the timer to not set the time. I have like 4 issues to try to answer your question. The first one is about a new challenge that internationally is going to be very important for us. Now we are very worried about what happened with refugees. For example, with Venezuela, Palestine, and other countries. But what will happen in the future? In the next future about climate change refugees. I invite you to think about what happened with the island in the Pacific and the rest of the world. It's time to change our mind and, of course, to change the regulation. Now we have, for example, regulations about refugees in the international law. But we don't know how to respond and have an exact answer. Who is the responsibility of this problem? And it's the next problem. But if it's a refugee, so it doesn't matter. The second point is very important, is to, we are talking about countries. And the countries, the states are, they have a factor, a characteristic, is the sovereignty. And that is a big problem, because if we want in a country to regulate internal, that's no matter, because you have a lot of changes, you have your own regulation. But the big challenge is how to regulate with all the countries. Now, at the moment, we are working, for example, in a big international agreement about plastics in the oceans. But now it's time to talk about an international agreement about water, and of course to talk about water crisis, and of course to talk about what happened with water security. But there is, I'm very worried, and I agree with the people from the last panel about the changes in the democracies, in the elections, and this how is so important to how to transform all these forums, all these ideas, all the papers in regulations and in public policies. It's not too easy. It's not too easy because if you ask, probably there is a lot of people from state institutions here, but the problem is that who takes the decisions is in the high level. And in the high level now is in Quito, in specific, for example, in Ecuador, and in some countries in Latin America, all the decisions are in the capital. Decentralization is a big problem, first. Second one, the social network is so important to try to communicate. But this is a big problem too, as to communicate in a bad way. For example, all the conclusions in this important forum could be debated with a TikToker or a YouTuber that will say, no, that's a lie. I have other information. And there is no information. So we have a new challenge now. And the last one is, for example, to try to answer your questions, what happened with big issues like the ecocide? You know, we have here in the International Criminal Court. And the International Criminal Court is the most important institution who judge persons, not the states, about the crimes of the humanity, aggression, criminal wars, etc. It's time to talk about ecocides, for example. I know that you know that now we have a big problem with Ukraine and Russia. And they are probably like 4 weeks ago, or 6 weeks ago, we have a problem with one of the most important dams there. And there is a big problem there. And there is a problem about, for example, transboundary, about the countries. For example, in Latin America, in the last year, we have a decision of the International Court in The Hague about Chile and Bolivia, about the case of Aguas del Silala. You know that in the Aguas del Silala starts a new step about the regulations and the new standards of the objective responsibility of the states about what happened in the transboundary frontiers. In this case, I'm very worried, for example, what happened in the Amazonian basin, specific in Peru, in Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, etc., about illegal mining. Why? Because probably in the future, what happened here in Ecuador, or what happened in Peru, or what happened in Colombia would have a lot of effects in other countries like Brazil. And it will start a demand at the International Court. So there is a new challenge, new problems, and of course, our responsibility is to try to regulate and give some solutions.
Okay, thank you very much. And what would you say, just a quick answer, makes the establishment of international council sense to get to better agreements and binding agreements between nations? What would you say? Is this makes sense, or
yeah? The big problem is that, for example, we assist a lot of a conference, international conference, with the states. But the problem is that it's part of the soft law. I think it's better to have from the hard law. Why? Because with the hard law you have an obligation, and of course there is the obligation of the states to try to be in the line. With soft law, you say, it's okay, we will try it in the future to adapt our own regulation, but if I want. So we are very happy, and we say, oh, okay, we have a very important win in this conference. Okay, but it's a conference. There is not a trade.
Okay. Yeah, the problem, I think, when we look to the UN, sometimes we have the imagination that this is a paper tiger, so that no really sanctions can be addressed in order to bring nations to that point that they have the responsibility and they are acting in a global context. Yeah, that's very important. And just one remark: in these days, there were a lot of discussions about the human right of water, and when I heard that water will soon be at the stock market, that I can't believe it. Yeah, I can't believe it. So. Thank you very much, Andres. With this, in this environment, I guess it's very important to integrate when we speak about society, science, policy, and maybe also legal regulations should be. When we talk about politics, of course, maybe legal regulation can also play a role, but instinctively we should integrate also these kind of questions, how we work together on which legal basis globally. I think that is very important. And then in that environment, Lars, all our efforts to get our messages of scientists across to the society, to transfer knowledge and also to policymakers, I think we need some special solutions. And I would like, in my address to you, you're an expert for integrated land and water resources management and director, as I said, International Institute of Technology. And you have, of course, an analytical eye for the current challenges in the field of water management. And against the backdrop of climate change, these challenges have become even more complex and show multiple interlinkage of water with energy, food, economy, society, and maybe also legal affairs. You once mentioned that the nexus, so here we have the anchor, the nexus, society, I mentioned again, science, policy, law. Nexus idea can have many interpretations, and its manifestations integrates multiple interactions between the aspects I mentioned before. Is the subsequent idea of a holistic approach helpful here to finally take the right adaptive measures in the face of climate change, and where should we start, Lars?
Yes.
Okay.
It's helpful. No, thank you very much for inviting me. Now on the third day here on the stage, so I'm a bit ashamed, but I hope I can contribute a little bit with some new thoughts, but also reflect a bit on what we have discussed in different sessions and so on. And you say, okay, integrated, this is a term we use, for example, integrated water resource management, a term around since a long time. Now you said holistic. So there are many ways to describe it. You can perhaps use other terms. Actually, the term I like even better is a system approach, because systems allow us to to talk about a certain thing in a structured way, and to analyze systems is an attempt to understand complexity. And I think what we have seen and what is basically happening right now and continue to happen towards perhaps a point of no return, tipping point or whatever, is that we are not only neglecting complexities, but we are apparently unable to grasp the complexities. And these attempts, holistic nexus, integrated system approach, are really just trials now to deal with complexity. And this is something we have to do, but it's utterly difficult to do that. But still, we have to continue to try it. And it has a long history. There are always coming new buzzwords, new fashions around, but it's, I think, a way of thinking that is very old, of course. It is, let's say, and being holistic in thinking was the old paradigm of philosophy and so on. We have, if we look in the more recent history, we had attempts of system dynamic modeling, for example. One of the very famous reports was the Limits to Growth report in 1972. No? So that is, and in that report, it was already at least, you cannot say predicted, because there are too many uncertainties. We all know that. Or as Walter has said, each model is wrong, citing Box. So that is, we know that these models are not representing reality, but they help us to look into parts of reality. And this is now 72, and then 20 years later, we had the first global conference on the human environment, and then UNEP was created, and so on. So many things happened, but even in 72, nobody spoke of climate change. Still, it was clear that we are heading towards, perhaps a catastrophe. And it was, many of the predictions were actually right, like the population development, also the excessive use of resources, pollution, and so on. Okay, not to make this too long, we are looking at perhaps solutions that are ahead of us, but I think system science is this perhaps a kind of approach where, at least from an academic point of view, we can come together, because biologists talk about ecosystems, or the cell is a system, or any kind of organism. We can talk about technical systems, we can talk about, of course, institutional systems, social systems, legal systems, and here we have at least a chance of having a right language, or a common language, where we could interact from the scientific domain. But more important would be perhaps then to think about, that was Jamie also mentioned as perhaps the hardest challenge, that's transdisciplinarity. And here also Martin asked the right question, how can we move towards that? And I think this is really the biggest chance. Now Christian gave some examples of how that works, perhaps from a university perspective. I'm not sure if transdisciplinarity is the best term, because people still think, this is academia, disciplines and science or something like that. But we should perhaps look then more to other terms that are now fashion, but perhaps describe it better, like co-creation of knowledge, or co-design. I think that's the right way, and I think it was rightly mentioned, we are definitely not having let's say the scientific community as the owner or the safeguard of knowledge. But knowledge is everywhere, and we have to find new ways of uniting that knowledge and getting that knowledge. So we need these ways how to do that, how to interact. And if I had more time, I could give some examples of current projects we have and how we do it. I think there are ways to do it, also immersing students from the very first semester into reality and bringing them to our local municipalities. But I think there's still a long way ahead of us, and I'm really keen to also hear the best practice examples, how this interface can really function well. If we are doing that, we're talking to a municipality. If it's not a big municipality, then they are looking at us a bit as strange species. They are the science. They are these from the university. There's not a common let's say, way to interact in a day-to-day or in a more continuous way. I think this is what we really need to improve, and for that the question is, do we need new interfaces that are moderating, or does every one of us need to change? You know? And I think here, again, I think, Jamie, thank you. You gave these messages very clearly also, that information is not enough. We need to have an awareness that this is important, and we need to have the wish and the will to move in that direction. No? And every one of us. So it's not enough that academia is approaching practice, but we should create an awareness that only in this, let's say, joint way we are able to confront complexity. No? It's not the next model that allows us to quantify all the system dynamics, but it's really a way of common action that will be the only way to get out of that crisis. That's what I think. I didn't look at the watch from the feeling I consumed my time already.
It's okay. I will get the sign from somewhere else. Okay, you will. We'll do this as we are too far in time. Thank you very much, Lars. And I would like to come to Diana now, because I see there can be now built a bridge from science representatives, so to speak, from some institutional areas where you are working as a lawyer, for example, but also in the university, but also to the private sector. And you are representing here, Diana, and you come from the water management and service area, and being one of the co-founder and leader of the water network in Ecuador. I would like to ask you, which obstacles or challenges did you encounter in advancing water management towards climate change adaptation?
Thank you so much, and it's hard to speak after all these amazing panelists, and it's an honor to be here. And maybe to start about the challenges, I would like to explain maybe personal challenges, which is different than like communitary challenges. And being a woman in a water sector is like the first challenge. So it's difficult to be a woman here alone. But at the same time, it's an honor to be here. So I would like to also explain that even if I work in the private sector, I would like to say that I am more than something like an activist. And I think that this is something more difficult in the water sector, because it's an interconnection between this technical part of water management and also this social change that we want to see. So being an activist in the water sector is something that nobody pays. So working for a change is something that nobody will pay you for that. So in this personal level, I think that all of us that are working for this change, something asked about incentives or financing this kind of different approaches in research. And I will tell you that nobody will pay that. And I think that this is something that will happen because the people who has the money don't want to change that. So I would like to say that this common agenda and these changes that we want to see is something that we should integrate in our daily work. And if I want to do a consultancy about water, I should integrate this knowledge about what is the social change that I want to see. So talking about challenges, like in general challenges, I think that one of the most important challenges that I have to face is to agree what is the change that we want to see, what is the agenda, how this agenda looks like. And I have been working with youth movements in the water sector, and having a common agenda, it's difficult. So all of us have good ideas and good researches about water sector, but how these researchers can change the world, I think that we should put that in an agenda, and we should be clear about this agenda and agree that not all the things that we want to see are possible in this moment. And if that is not possible in this moment, how this change will happen in the short term. So my colleague was working about Paris Agreement, and to achieve this agreement, I don't remember, it was like 25 COPs, 25 international meetings to agree what we want. So in the water sector, when we are working, or we will work in this agenda, because if you can see the World Water Forum, the World Water Week, and all these kind of international events are managed by private companies. So I think that what is the purpose of the social movement and the civil society movement? And also I think, and I would like to think, that the social movement is integrated also by scientists and researchers. So when we agree about this common agenda. Also about climate change, I think that if we are working in this sector, we can see that all the people, and not all the people, the majority, and especially the ones who are influencing climate change policies, they don't want to change anything. So they are talking about carbon markets and how to maintain this system. So I think that water sector has the opportunity to propose this change, because people can feel climate change because they are connected with the water. So if you talk to a community and you say that, oh, climate change is happening and this is a problem, community maybe doesn't care, because they think that access to water systems and irrigations, this is the real problem. So I think that the water sector has the opportunity and the challenge to translate the real and the local problems to this international stage about climate change. And finally, I think that maybe we are not ready to, or we don't have enough technical and social proposals to change this sector about climate change. So when we are creating projects related with water security or water management with climate change, you can see the same. We should create an early warning system. We should create like a reservoir. We should create an irrigation system. And at the end, this climate change project, at least in Latin America, is something that we want to take a photo. So we are creating projects related with water just to take a photo and say that, oh, I am doing something. But at the end, is this changing the world? Is this changing the water management? I think this reflection about our role in the water sector and our own role in the water sector as researchers, as professors, is part of the challenge. So what are we doing as professors? What are we doing as students? And what are we doing as a civil society? This is part of the challenges.
Okay, thank you very much, Diana. And just a quick question to you. When we look at the relationship between science and politicians and policy, can you imagine to be in between as a, I don't know, as a glue, or not the wrong word, as a hub or a connecting point between these two parties? We always talk about transfer of knowledge or exchange of knowledge. Is there a role in between of consultants?
Yes, I think that consultancy is a good opportunity when you are like a politician and also an activist. Mm-hmm. So being a consultant is a flexible position, I feel. But I think that we have in Ecuador something like a phrase say that hay que mojarse el poncho. That means you should go to do the things and do the change. So I think that being a consultancy in the water sector is for policymakers. So at the end, all the positions related with the water sector is an opportunity. So I feel that if you are a consultant, you have the opportunity to say, like, technical recommendations, but at the end, to understand these two worlds, like these researchers and like more scientific world, and also this policymakers world. And yes, maybe if you want to do the change, you should say the things that it's maybe not so. It's not so easy to say, but it's part of the change. So in that position, it's easy to speak with the politicians because they say that, oh, you are a specialist and you know what are you saying. So maybe this is a good opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. Last but not least, Victor, just to focus a little bit on your practical experiences. You are very active in the Asian area. You did a lot of work as far as water security index calculation is concerned, and you did it for a lot of countries and cities, big cities in Asia. And as we have learned from the workshop, that water security index is very useful for decision making, to bring decision makers in front of their eyes what actually they have to do really in practice. And you can translate this index into action to show to the decision makers what kind of change they have to make, and also to build scenarios. Can you speak maybe two or three examples? Maybe you have been in communication with some local authorities, or with when you look at the capitals, Bangkok or Hanoi, where you have been, for example. You had talks with decision makers there. What was your impression?
Thank you.
Were they very open? Just to hear some good example, perhaps.
No, great. Thank you, Andreas. Well, there's something that I have learned, and it is it's a fairly recent thing, that the decision makers think very differently from how we do. Okay, as a scientific community, as a technical community, I think, and I'm not talking about the scope of work. The scope of work, of course, is different, right? It's just the way they think is a little different, right? And I think to understand that thinking is the key, to influence, the translation of science into practice, right? So let me give you an example, a couple of examples here. I was tasked by the Indian government to work with one city in India, okay, which was facing a lot of water-related issues. And one of the things that emerged, through all the analysis that my team and I did, was that city had a lot of high NRW, non-revenue water. I think all of us here would be familiar with that term, right? Something close to 60-65% of NRW, right? So when I presented the results to the decision maker, right, the reasons there was an inquiry about what was the reasons for the NRW, and a bulk of it, a good portion of it, was actually because of water theft, right? So now his perspective was that well, people are stealing water, but they're stealing water to meet a basic human need, right? They're meeting to meet their own need, right? So I don't see that so much as a problem, right? Because I'm not able to provide water for them, they are stealing the water, right? This is just an example here, right? So while high NRW is very detrimental to water security from a utility perspective, from a water utility, because I think they would use that as a performance indicator, but in the larger scheme of things, perhaps it's not so much of a problem, right? And I think understanding that larger picture, and I think Lars to some extent also pointed that out, that systems approach, that systems thinking, looking at that bird's eye view of the situation, actually helps in arriving at some decisions, right? The other example I'd like to share is, with the city of Delhi. Okay, so my team and I, we were preparing the master plan for Delhi, right? So this is a long-term 20-year plan for Delhi. And the government of Delhi introduced a very controversial policy some time back, and that is to provide free water up to 20 cubic meters to every household, right? So, of course, there are various reasons. Some say it was political, whatever the reasons were. There was free water being provided to all the households. And as expected, there was a lot of hue and cry about it, right? How can you provide free water? Water is a precious resource. The value for water would go down, so on and so forth, right? So what we did is we pulled up the data. We asked the agency concerned with water management to provide us with the data, and two things emerged very prominently. One is that after the introduction of that policy, the number of metered connections rose by 8-fold, right? Almost 8 times the metered connections in the city grew, right? Which was a task, and in the past it was very difficult to convince the citizens of Delhi to actually apply for a meter, right? And secondly, there were hardly any households that were consuming more than 20 cubic meters of water. So in some weird way, this was actually a demand management instrument, right? Controlling the demand for water, right? So of course we had our theory that perhaps people are using the free water for the 20 cubic meters and then switching to some other source to avail of that free content, right? But all said and done, I think these nuances, this larger thinking is a little critical in understanding how to influence the translation of all the scientific inputs that we produce into practice as such, right? So very briefly, there was something that we did in India, and my colleague Jyoti is going to talk about that in one of the sessions today in the afternoon. Understanding that nuances, we actually came up with a framework, in the Indian cities for managing urban rivers. And Andreas, you and Lars are also part of that, part of the book that we wrote together as well, right? So the idea here was that typically in India, urban river management was mandatorily associated with pollution control, right? So when you talk about river management, you only talk about pollution control. And that is the thinking we wanted to change in India, right? So we introduced a framework, and getting the buy-in of all the stakeholders, talking to them, to arrive at a framework that looks at not just the environment, but also the social and the economic aspects, right? So understanding what decision makers want, right? And somehow that just clicked, that worked. Okay, the Minister for Jal Shakti, the Minister of Water Resources, he was the one who endorsed it. He launched that framework today, I think 2 years ago. Okay, and now I think close to 60 to 70 cities in India are already using that framework, right? So So like I said, right, I know that understanding the ground situation, understanding the various factors, the pushes, the push and pull factors, the pain points are critical to effecting this translation.
Oh, thank you very much, Victor, giving us some insight of your work and from your angle of experience you gained in that area. I'm now turning my head to the audience, and I would like to ask you to ask questions burning under your fingernails. Rodolfo, you're the first over there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the discussion. I think, from my view, regulations are very, very important. But since perhaps 25 years ago, I have always the same question: how to regulate when laws are focused to providing legal certainties? And for example, if we talk about climate and its consequences are very uncertain and changeable over the time and the space. For another example, coastal areas are reshaping all the time due to local, regional, and global factors. How to do it? Because at least in my case, and I can say that is the case of Latin America and many countries, we have a lot of unapplied regulations.
Whom you would ask? To all of?
Any.
Okay.
Because I think that it's crossing all the talks.
Okay. You would like? Okay.
Should I start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Probably this is the big gap, and this is the big problem that I tried to explain you at first. That is we think that the problem is only in my country, but the problem is a global country, a global problem. And the global problem, they need global solutions. But to try to give global solutions is not too easy to try to define the same standards of each country. Because I only put an example about plastics, for example, plastic pollution. And we have a very specific example in Ecuador, and specific in Galapagos Island. One of my colleagues work in Galapagos Island in the station, and they start to try to know what happened in the beach specific with the plastic. And the response of the local government says, okay, we need to have a regulations to provide the use of single-use plastics. But the problem is that probably like 6 months later, we have the same problem. And they start to know that the problem of the plastics is not from the island, it's from the rest of the countries that from the different forms goes to the island. This is an example to say that in the most cases, the states and the presidents and the politicians tries to give solutions only when the problem is a crisis. It's like it's like when you have fire, you call the station and say, we have a problem. Mm-hmm. Probably is the same now with plastic pollutions, and it could be the next step with a water crisis. Why? Because probably in the future, we try to say, okay, we will have a conference to have the same standards. But the problem, and I finish with this, is that not all the countries are in the same start line. Why? It's the same that you said, for example, with climate change, and we are very worried like 25 years ago, but it's not the same the reality of the European Union countries, and it's not the same the reality of Latin American countries, and it's not the same China, etc. So if we start like in a race, and we put in the start line, we are not in the same line. Why? Because you have a lot of difference. And that difference, of course, influence in the treaties. And there is like 10 years to say, okay, let's put this standard and we could change this variable because I'm not in the opportunity to do this or that. That's happening, is the most important example in the case of the Paris Agreement in 25, yes.
25, yeah. Thank you, Andreas. Other questions? Yeah, over there. And then, please, and then he was first, and then, yeah, here in front of you. Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your insights and also from the practical experiences that you all bring on board. I was just thinking through how water is seen in the international development agenda or in the international environmental discussions. Increasingly, it is felt that, it is a poor cousin. It always comes afterwards. Now, why I'm saying this, you consider G20, which is the, kind of a largest platform for countries to come together and discuss on the development agenda, environment agenda. So only, I think about 3 years back, it made the entry when the G20, I think it happened in Saudi Arabia. There they bring in the water, and maybe because it was one of the important things for them to address. And even in the Indian presidency, we made a lot of effort to work along with the government to ensure that, there is something which goes into the leadership declaration when they talk about water, and one line entered there. If you look at the COP, now, water in the COP, I really struggle, where it is. For the first time this year, there is an entire day dedicated to water, land, and agriculture. Before this, I don't think water was discussed as a mainstream there. Now, you consider SDG 17, which says that we have to develop partnership, collaboration, to achieve SDG goals, climate action, water action, SDG 6. So, what needs to be done? I mean, why it is, it is one of the important resources to be managed. Entire life, environment, community, industry, productive industrial functions all depend on it. But why it is still seen as a poor cousin and unable to make entry into this international negotiation space? And sorry for a longish kind of a inquiry.
Okay. To whom you would like to address the question? To all? Or comment?
Yes, maybe something controversial that I want to say is a question about, is water part of the environmental sector? I will say no. And why I will say no? Because who is behind the water sector? I think that behind the water sector is the social movement. Who is behind the environmental sector? Companies, enterprises. If you can check who is the Ministry of Environment things in the countries, it's something related with industries. So in the water sector, there is a lot of social movements behind. And that's why I feel that these international conferences are not looking water in this stage that water influences environmental decisions. So I think that our responsibility is to put the water in this first place that should have. But at the same time, we should know that it's not so easy because it's something that people don't want to talk about. So in the COP, as you say, when you see what are the topics related with water, it's about a little bit about water pollution because nobody wants to talk about water pollution. And sometimes something about water infrastructure. Maybe this is the most important topic in the COP and how to finance some infrastructure. And water resources protection, because this is nice to see how people is protecting water, and that's all. But not all the complexity behind water. So I think that our role in this international event is to show the complexity in the water sector.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues.
Can I just add something to this, Andreas? Yeah. Just one little thing.
2 seconds.
Yeah, sure. I think, Nitin, that's a great question, that water has just recently been looked at from the COP perspective, right? But the thing is that, for a very long time, the COP agenda was focused purely on the mitigation aspects, reducing GHG emissions, so on and so forth. Because for that long time, we were pretty much convinced that we could stop climate change. We could. There is something that we could do. So adaptation argument did not really feature until the last 5 years or so, 5-6 years or so, right? So it's actually when the adaptation argument featured into the discussions, that is when now the water sector, is being pulled into this, because the water is the primary medium, through which the climate change effects are being manifested, right? Okay. So perhaps that is one reason, but I'm glad at least it's happening, and I think over the years, we will have more and more traction on that. Yeah.
Thanks, Victor. I'm really sorry to two of these colleagues here in front. Maybe you can address your questions in the coffee break or during dinner. I'm very sorry for that. We are out of time a bit, and I would like to ask you to stay here to take a photo from all of you, maybe here on the stage. Maybe we have to move some things here in the corner, but stay here and let's have this photo.